Invincible is one of the standout shows of the streaming era, and after 3 seasons, there is a detail about it that doesn't get talked about enough: how well it handles its female cast. Adult animation has a rough track record here. Women often get reduced to stock roles. Invincible mostly avoids that trap, and I want to walk through why, character by character. Fair warning, full spoilers ahead for everything released so far. Let's start with Adam Eve, because her arc is basically a case study in how to write an overpowered female character without falling into Mary Sue territory. That label gets thrown around constantly and misused just as often. So, let's define it properly first. A Mary Sue is a character whose competence or power isn't earned by the story. It is just handed to them. Rey from the sequel-era Star Wars films is the textbook example. She flies the Falcon better than its own crew on her first try, wins a lightsaber duel with 0 training, and none of it is explained. Raw power alone doesn't make a Mary Sue, though it is power without narrative cost. Eve, by contrast, can restructure matter at the atomic level, which might be the single most broken ability in the entire show outside of Viltrumites. But the writers seem to have built her specifically to dodge the Mary Sue label. A prequel special lays out her backstory. She wasn't born this powerful, she was engineered. A government experiment designed to produce the perfect weapon. That explains the power, and it comes bundled with real limits. Her genius is narrow, confined almost entirely to hard science. She is an average student everywhere else. She also carries a built-in psychological block that stops her from altering living tissue, meaning she can grow a garden instantly, but can't heal a wound. That block only breaks under extreme trauma, which is a well-worn trope, sure, but it is consistent, and it is earned rather than convenient. More importantly, her power doesn't make her a good fighter. As a kid, she beats Kill Cannon, mostly through surprise and raw force, not skill, and a single retaliatory hit sends her flying because she has no sense of positioning. As an adult, she beats him again, but recklessly, endangering bystanders in the process. Her own siblings nearly kill her. Her impulsiveness costs her a friendship, gets her captured, and indirectly leads to the death of a father figure. This is not a character coasting on invincibility. Her power is closer to a liability she hasn't learned to control. The Mary Sue trope also covers characters who function as wish fulfillment for the audience or writer, Bella Swan from Twilight being the classic example. An ordinary girl who somehow has every love interest fawning over her for no clear reason. Eve doesn't get that treatment either. She is implied to be attractive, sure, but Rex cheats on her, and Mark stays with Amber, even knowing Eve is available. Nobody else is written as chasing her. And her arc has a genuinely humbling beat. She tries to rebuild a collapsed park using her powers, and it fails, because knowing how to reshape matter isn't the same as understanding architecture. She nearly makes things worse, and instead of shrugging it off, she enrolls in architecture classes. That is a hyper-competent character being shown on screen. That raw power has limits, which is exactly what keeps her from being a Mary Sue. Some viewers criticize her for being underused as a fighter, but that misses the point. She was never written as a fighter. She is written as someone who wants to help, and that shows up more in stopping a landslide or accelerating crop growth than in throwing punches alongside the teen team. Now, let's talk about Debbie Grayson, because cartoon moms usually get stuck playing one role, the nagging voice of reason. It is the trope where the mother exists mainly to call out her husband's or kids' mistakes, usually coming across as condescending or shrill. Think Marge Simpson, Lois Griffin, Alice Mitchell. It is not that the trope is inherently bad. It is that it flattens these characters into scolds, even when they're technically right. Debbie's very first scene sort of sets her up that way. She walks in on Mark in a vulnerable moment and asserts parental authority. But once Mark's powers emerge, that dynamic gets genuinely tested. He can suddenly fly, punch through walls, take a hit, and she is just human. There is a scene where Mark, frustrated at not being able to land properly, tries to sneak out to practice at night, and Debbie shuts it down, reasserting her authority, even though she clearly understands how much this matters to him. He goes quiet, and that is the turning point, because Debbie realizes Mark isn't just annoyed. He is struggling. He is failing to land. He is getting knocked around during training with his dad. His entire sense of self has been upended almost overnight. and he is still a teenager underneath all of it. That is when her tone shifts completely. For the first time, she opens up to him, admits that his new powers scare her, that she is afraid of losing the ability to relate to her own son. That vulnerability matters because it tells Mark he is not the only one who is scared. He reassures her back, and she tells him something that lands hard given everything else going on in that first season. He doesn't need to live up to his father's legacy. He just needs to be the best version of himself. Considering how badly Nolan is fumbling the job of preparing his son, that is a genuinely powerful moment. Proof that authority and warmth aren't mutually exclusive, and that Debbie can be both the disciplinarian and the emotional anchor. There is also an interesting twist on the classic Lois Lane dynamic here. Traditionally, part of the Superman formula is the love interest suspecting the secret identity without knowing for sure. Invincible flips it. Debbie already knows Nolan is a superhero from the start. That is part of why she fell for him. It is only later, once she has reason to suspect he is hiding something deeper, that the investigation and doubt creep in. Same skeleton as the Lois and Clark dynamic, different execution. And that leads into the show's recurring theme: superhero normal relationships basically don't survive contact with reality here. Mainstream superhero media has trained us to expect otherwise. Superman and Lois, Iron Man and Pepper, Flash and Iris, all make it work. Invincible pushes back on that. Debbie and Nolan look like a loving couple early on, until it is revealed Nolan slaughtered the Guardians of the Globe, treated his wife more like property than a partner, beat his son nearly to death, and abandoned the family without a word. Even Red Rush's relationship falls apart because his powers make normal connection impossible. The show is consistent. Love isn't automatically enough when one partner is living in a completely different reality than the other. Which brings us to Amber, arguably the most tragic normal human character in the show, because she exists to demonstrate exactly that theme. Across the first season, Nolan spends a lot of time coaching Mark on how to be a hero, but conveniently never has to explain how he handled hiding his identity from a partner, because Debbie always knew Mark doesn't get that shortcut. Being a teenager and a comic nerd, his instinct is to keep the secret as long as possible, even though there is an early, easy-to-miss moment where Amber makes clear she values honesty above almost everything else in a relationship. If Mark had picked up on that, a lot of the coming conflict was avoidable. Instead, he keeps making up excuses for disappearing. And by episode 7 of the first season, Amber's had enough. From her perspective, her boyfriend has simply been lying to her face, repeatedly, for no reason she can see. Was she overreacting? Kind of. But she is a teenager without the context Mark has. And she doesn't even read comics. So the whole secret identity logic doesn't really register for her. They patch things up and get more time together in season 2. But the pattern from before holds. It doesn't last. Mark disappears to another planet, leaving her feeling abandoned. And when he finally returns, and they try to reconnect, Anissa shows up and threatens Amber's life just to get to Mark. That is the breaking point. Amber's entire arc functions as proof of the show is central relationship theme. That being with a superhero, no matter how much you care about them, comes with a cost most people aren't equipped to carry. The show also plays with how female supers relate to each other and to power itself. It is ambiguous whether Monster Girl and Rexplode are actually together, but there is clearly mutual attraction, and it is her desire for real human connection that pushes Rudy, Rex, to eventually engineer himself a younger body using Martian technology, just so they can exist on the same page, so to speak. He ends up helping her find a way to slow the aging curse tied to her transformations. And speaking of that transformation, Monster Girl is a quiet subversion of the magical girl trope. Usually when a young girl transforms in fiction, it is into something more traditionally feminine, sparkles, ribbons, that kind of visual language. Monster Girl transforms into a hulking green brute instead, and the show never treats that as a punishment or a joke. Duplicate Girl subverts something else entirely. The disposable goon media conditions us not to care when nameless mooks die in large numbers. Usually, male mercenaries, or soldiers who exist purely to demonstrate a hero's strength. Duplicate girls' clones die constantly, and often brutally, and the show doesn't soften it. It is genuinely jarring the first time you see a female character killed that casually over and over, and that repetition is actually what gives her common ground with Immortal, a character who has also died dozens of times across centuries. Their relationship, culminating in a proposal after the Invincible War, is framed as one of the few superhero-superhero relationships that might actually work, specifically because they're on equal footing when it comes to mortality and violence. Shrinking Ray doesn't get that same happy ending. Season 3 finally gives her real backstory. She was pushed into hero work by her parents and never got the chance to live an ordinary life, which is a dynamic a lot of people will recognize from stories about child performers. She opens up about this to Rex, who by this point is actively trying to become a better version of himself, someone other than the guy who cheated on Eve or got dumped by Kate. After surviving a near-death encounter together, they form a real connection. But Ray eventually decides she wants out of the superhero life entirely, while Rex can't bring himself to walk away from the only life he has known. It is a quieter, sadder version of the same theme running through Ember and Debbie's stories. Last, I want to bring up Anissa because she is the first female villain the show presents as a genuine world-ending threat. We're shown, not just told, how far outside Mark's weight class she is. She one-shots a sea monster that gives Mark serious trouble, and when he challenges her directly, she dismantles him in a handful of hits. It is the first time the show frames a woman as an existential-level threat on par with Omni-Man, and it forces Mark to actually train and grow to close that gap, setting up stakes that carry the story forward from there. Taken together, what stands out across all of these characters, Eve, Debbie, Amber, Monster Girl, Duplicate Girl, Shrinking Ray, Anissa, is that none of them are there just to fill a slot. They're allowed to be powerful and flawed, sympathetic and reckless, loving and still ultimately incompatible with the men around them. That is rarer than it should be in this genre, and it is a big part of why Invincible holds up as well as it does 3 seasons in. If you enjoyed this breakdown, let me know what you think in the comments, and stick around for more.